social justice in the state of New Jersey. What we are going to focus on doesn't simply apply to New Jersey, but also it is a case in all states in this country where Black people, taxpayers in America, but not getting our fair share of return. We talk about this whole issue of where's our money. We talk about the issue of Black economic social justice. And let me lay the framework of what we're talking about. And that is when we look at state governments, we look at nonprofits, we look at the federal government, we're talking about counties and the cities. We're talking about billions and billions of dollars that are going to companies every single day. Yet few of those dollars are matriculating to African Americans. What we're seeing is that we're being shut out. So you have Black folks who are elected to office. What happens when we talk about pension dollars, money that is the money of the dollars earned by African Americans and others, yet who is managing those dollars? When you talk about Wall Street, you talk about how that is being driven by those pension funds. Then we talk about contracting dollars, not just construction contracts, but engineering contracts, PR contracts, advertising contracts. Every single, again, city, county, state, and the federal government, they're spending literally billions upon billions of dollars. And in many places, we're getting 1%, maybe 2% of those dollars. In New Jersey this year, every state office holder is up for election. So what should folks in New Jersey be talking about in terms of demanding our economic dollars, our fair share from these politicians? New Jersey is also a state, significant number of Democrats. Democrats control the state. They depend upon Black votes. And so what should be happening is we should be saying, you want our vote? Hashtag where's our money? And so that's what we're going to be talking about. We've got a great panel lined up for you folks, a number of folks who are going to be joining us. Reverend Al Sharpton will be joining us, of course, founder of the National Action Network. Also speaking is Robert Smith, a billionaire investor and philanthropist. Also will be joined by Jennifer Jones Austin. She's host of Open Line Online, also board member of the National Action Network. Dr. David Jefferson, also pastor of Metropolitan Baptist Church, New Jersey State, board member of NAN. Also John Rogers, of course, founder of Aerial Management Funds. And so we'll be talking about all of this. And so the real goal for us folks here is, again, to get you to understand connecting the dots when it comes to money. When it comes to money, that is connecting the dots. That's the most important thing. And so let's kick things off. First off, are we joining us? First, we wanted to open this with Pastor Jefferson. Is he there? We can't hear you, Dr. Jefferson. Your mic is muted.
Thank you, Roland.
There we go.
Thank you so much. We're very honored to have all of our guests, very honored to have you. And I want to thank all the persons who have agreed to participate. I want to, at this time, just really bring up Reverend Al Sharpton. Reverend Sharpton has been on the journey of economic and social justice for a number of years. We are honored to have him today. And at this time, we're going to have Reverend Al to share with us our opening speech, our opening kickoff for this particular town hall. Reverend Al Sharpton. Rev, you're muted. You're good. You're good now, Rev.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Pastor Jefferson, and to all that are on the panel. I think this is a very important discussion, particularly when we're looking at New Jersey, but it is something that we ought to be duplicating nationwide, what we hope to see done in New Jersey. The fact of the matter is that if we go back to 1968, when Dr. King was killed, we hear a lot of emphasis about half of his economic program and the distortion of the civil rights movement. When Dr. King was killed, he had written a book in 1967 called Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community? And he had in the book two economic plans. One, he had the Poor People's Campaign to deal with a level of income, guaranteed income level, to eradicate poverty. And that is talked about from time to time, and it's a good thing, and it's something that should be continued. But what is not discussed is he had a program called Operation Breadbasket. And ironically, Jennifer Jones Austin, who's on the panel, his father led that chapter in New York under the national leadership of Reverend Jesse Jackson. And I became youth director in that year. I was 13 years old. I became youth director of Operation Breadbasket, New York's chapter. The idea of Breadbasket, as outlined by Dr. King, is that the private sector and the public sector must do business with the Black community. We found that there were corporations that were in business in our community. We were large consumers of them, but we could not get contracts. We couldn't get shelf space in their retailers. We could not get certain jobs. And Dr. King, taking the theme from Reverend Leon Sullivan, who had started this in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia to be exact, said that we must target them and target the public sector at the same time. Down through the years, it grew and developed. Over the last several years, National Action Network has worked in this area in terms of asset managers, in terms of advertising, and in terms of other things in the financial service industry. Not enough focus has been put on the fact that many of those that are running for office in New Jersey this year can promise charity, but not parity. They will say that, well, we'll give you a grant for a daycare center, which is good, or we'll give you some funding for this, that, or the other, which is good. But they never talk about who is going to manage state money when we are a major part of the populace in the state, and an even higher percentage of the votes they depend on to run state government. They never talk about where they're going to bank their money. They never talk about where they're going to use their state advertising budget and the advertising agencies. When Nan started this a few years ago, there were super Black advertising agencies. There's almost none now, because what they've allowed people to do is go to major white agencies. They say we can deal and deliver the Black market. Blacks listen to mainstream media, so you don't need them, and just about wipe them out. Same with Black-owned radio. Kathy Hughes is one of the few that's left with a large amount of Black-owned stations. I'm still doing a syndicated show 5 days a week, 3 hours a day on Kathy Hughes stations and WVON in Chicago. So when I look at the fact that even those that call themselves progressive are progressive in many political areas or even social justice areas, but not financial areas. So if I'm fighting, as we are now, the George Floyd case or other related cases, we can go to unions and they'll help us put 200,000 people in Washington like we did last year. But when we look at their pension funds, we are not managing those funds, even though the majority of their members are Black and Latino. There's a union in New York that we're jumping on now. I'm announcing something this week in National Action Network's convention. They have 67% of their union members are Black and brown. When we ask them who invests and manages their pension funds, zero. The president of the union didn't even know the members on the board that decide where the pension fund investments are. We're going after that union, and we're going to announce something this week. Because what effectively happens is you have white developers that go to pension funds, borrow money to do their development. They're not using their money. They're getting pension fund investments. They take them that money, go into communities and do their development. So what in effect happens is grandma's pensions is being used to gentrify grandma out of her own community. We're paying for gentrification because we are not building economic accountability. We are giving away our votes too cheaply. We must add to every political endorsement and every drive that we want to not only know what you will do around social justice, clearly police reform, clearly mass incarceration, but what are you doing in terms of business with our community? You cannot have us elect you and then you do business in a segregated apartheid way. And I think that if we can have that as a model in New Jersey, where they cannot win the governor on down, cannot win without the black vote. The black vote must be not that we want charity, but economic parity. We want to see where you do your business. Not only feel sorry for us, empathize with us that are poor, but do business with those of us that are in business. And I can say many of them, clearly those that are on this panel, have invested in our community. There's no one comparable to the kind of business investments as well as philanthropy that Robert Smith has done, which is why his adversaries from time to time take a shot at him. No one has been more involved than John Rogers. So it's not about making some blacks rich. Their wealth enriches our community, and we need to make sure the stronger they are, the more they build a legacy, the more we will have the economic independence to do what we want to do and to elect those that are in business with us. We shouldn't vote for folks that are not in business with us. We should not deal with folks that are not in business with us. If you're not in business with us, then you're in business with those that may be adversarial to our interests. You ought to go get your votes from them. But if you want your votes from us, then you need to be in business with us. And if ministers and fraternity leaders and HBCU leaders and civil rights leaders can all adopt that theme of we will do business with those that are in business with us, we can move this further down the road. Other than that, we're dealing with people that will join us on the front lines of George Floyd, but will not join us in making sure blacks go to the bank. We are not looking for better slave masters. We're looking for freedom, and freedom means economic independence. Thank you, Reverend Jefferson, for having me give a few words to start this off.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Al, and we appreciate that. That, ladies and gentlemen, will set the tone for our discussion. We're going to now turn it back to Roland, but let me just say this before we indeed turn it back to Roland, and he's going to do an interview with Robert Smith. Let me say that one of the things that we will do in the state of New Jersey, and we will emphasize this a little bit later in the program, we will draft a pledge to get every elected official to buy into, make a commitment, and execute on an economic justice piece of legislation before we have individuals to vote for them. One of the things that Reverend Al did in the last presidential election, where he had people to come forth in the Democratic Party, he asked them that if a legislation bill of reparation hit their desk, would they sign it? And they committed to yes. That's the same kind of commitment, ladies and gentlemen, that we need from individuals who will be running for office in the state of New Jersey. Many of those persons starting with the governors in office right now. So they don't need to promise us anything. They're in a position to do something now. And if they're not willing to do something now, then we should not be casting our vote for individuals who are going to continue to keep us in a position of economic disparity, as opposed to individuals who are willing to make a commitment so that we can transform the landscape of the economics in the state of New Jersey. Once again, I am proud to have everyone with us, but we have to indeed move forward with the program to deal with some of the critical issues that we need to deal with, as Reverend Sharpton and Roland has set the stage and set the tone. So with that in mind, I'm going to now pass it back to our host for this evening, and that is none other than Roland Martin. Roland, thank you so much. And now he will move to Mr. Smith, Robert Smith.
All right, folks. So let me provide some additional context for what you just heard from Reverend Sharpton. We talked about Operation Breadbasket. It was actually an idea conceived by Reverend Leon Sullivan in Philadelphia. Dr. King asked Reverend Sullivan to come present that to the SCLC. and they adopted that as, and they named it Operation Breadbasket. That, of course, he put Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. over that particular program. Martin Depp has a phenomenal book. He was actually on the executive committee. He was a white pastor there in Chicago. The book is called Operation Breadbasket, An Untold Story of Civil Rights in Chicago, 1966 to 1971. This is the book right here. If you want to understand what that economic plan was, they simply did not go to companies and say, we want you to hire Black people. They went to companies and said, we want to see African Americans hired. We want to see them placed in senior management. We want to see you place money in Black banks. We want to see you also do deals with Black-owned companies in terms of contracting, what we call today minority supplier development. And then they educated their church members. They did not start with economic boycotts. That was the last piece. They went to them to get their data. And then what they then did was try to negotiate these deals. One of the things that Martin Depp said was their greatest weakness was they did not have the proper follow-up. They had these deals, but after they struck these deals, they had the initial euphoria. They did not have the proper follow-up to ensure the companies were abiding by those deals that were signed. You ought to get this book to really understand how Breadbasket worked, because I think part of the problem today is folks are real quick to yell, boycott, real quick to yell, we need to do something, but they're not being very strategic and actually planning that. When we talk about resources, we're talking about billions and billions of dollars. Our next guest, understands that. Robert Smith is the founder, chairman, and CEO, Vista Equity Partners. They manage more than $70 billion, owning 6 companies. And Robert, glad to have you as a part of this conversation on Black economic and social justice in New Jersey. Of course, and we're talking about also how it impacts the rest of the country. I want to start here, Robert, by us connecting the dots, and that is there are a number of companies out here. People love talking about. I hear all these. We don't want to give folks handouts, but the reality is, if you look at the wealth of a Donald Trump, it came from his dad. Housing contracts from HUD. You look at companies out here, research and development, they actually built their money based upon government. Elon Musk, the amount of the significant state dollars that he's received to build these companies. And so we need to get our folks to understand that billion-dollar companies have been built based upon the contracts from city, county, state, and federal government. They don't call it a handout, they call that investment.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And Brother Martin, so good to see you. And thank you for inviting me. You're hitting exactly right. And this is, if you go back and really think about, Paul Robeson and how he talked about access to primary capital, 50 plus years ago, which is what our community has not had access to. That primary capital, of course, started in this country with land. And the people, which were our people who were actually, driving the productivity of that land, many spaces that we didn't get the opportunity to participate in, the Homestead Act, the Southern Homestead Act, even the GI Bill and other elements that the government was using to redistribute capital to citizens in this country, we did not participate in. And so when we also ended up in a period of time where we were now looking to see the expansion of real estate and housing, we were cut out of that through redlining and inability for our houses to create value and to appreciate, which meant we couldn't necessarily refinance them and take that capital, invest in businesses, and ensure that our children had the proper college educations to participate in the opportunities of America. So at the end of the day, access to capital is access to opportunity, and that is something that our community has been starved of. You and I have talked about this many times. 70% of African American communities actually don't have a branch bank. Now, I sit here with a number of folks in the alternative space, and here's a staggering statistic, Roland. There's about $19 trillion in the pension fund systems in the United States. That's federal, state, local companies, etc. All of the African American managers combined manage less than 1% of that. So, from our perspective, there's an element of how do we get more capital not only managed by us, but access to it. If we don't have access through the banks, to the banking systems, the financial architecture, and we don't have access to manage that capital, to even drive the returns of that capital into our infrastructure, we will continue to starve the infrastructure of our communities. And so it's imperative that we use this moment in time when there's an awareness, when we have actually people like you who are raising awareness in social media, where people are saying, hey, this is unfair, that we can actually change this dynamic and change the wealth dynamic in our community, and the time is now.
So my man Joe Madison, Sirius XM, has a great phrase. He says we got to put it where the goats can get it. And so for the folks who are watching, that may have gone over their head. When you say $19 trillion in pension funds, what we need people to understand is that if the people who are watching, or if you know somebody who is a teacher, a firefighter, a police officer, someone who is a city worker, a county government worker, they could be a secretary or an administrative assistant for the state government or the federal government. Those represent the pension funds. And so they all have pensions. And so in New Jersey, it is estimated that 40% of the people who are part of the pension funds in New Jersey are African American. So that means that the pension funds of these black and brown workers, that's the money that is driving venture capitalists. That's the money that's driving Silicon Valley. That's the money that's driving Wall Street. Those are the largest investors. And so what's happening is we have white folks at every level managing, directing, and controlling those funds, going to private equity companies that are investing those dollars, buying other companies, investing in infrastructure, all those things. And so essentially, the work of black people, everyday black people, is funding all these things across the country, and largely white people are benefiting and becoming billionaires and multimillionaires off of the capital of that regular, ordinary black garbage worker or secretary.
So Roland, the way to think about this, and that's a good expose, but you got to unpack this a whole lot more. It's right. Complex. But here's the way to think about this. One of the greatest outgrowths of the civil rights movement was our people's ability to get these jobs, to work for the government, to work in state, local, municipal, become teachers. My parents, my mother was telling me, when she moved to Denver, they had just started to allow African-American teachers to become part of the teachers union. And so they pay into that for 30 years until they retire. And they, and often, they reap the benefits, but often a fair amount of the amount of money they paid in, because of death and other things, they don't necessarily collect. And so that continues to build in these pension systems. But I think it's important to understand the vast majority of that ends up actually in fixed income and then in equities. And there's a small piece that actually ends up in the alternative space, which is, the asset managers, private equity, venture capital, et cetera. The better performing pieces, but that's a small piece. I think you have to actually look at it at a holistic level and say, what do we really need to do? We really need to look at all of the pension plans and say, how do we get this capital driven into our community? And it has to be done intentional. It has to be being driven into, as you say, where the goats can get it. That actually has to be through credit into our community, so our people can borrow money to grow their businesses, so our people can borrow money to mortgage their houses or to buy a house. That is the primary force that we need to drive through, is into the credit markets. And then we can talk about the alternatives in conjunction. But the vast majority of our community needs access to credit. And if we don't have banks in our community, or the CDFIs and MDIs aren't modernized well enough to actually deliver these sort of loans to our businesses, that's the challenge. You look at today, the federal government has approved in December, Congress approved more than $12 billion for CDFIs and minority banks. It's incumbent upon us to ensure that we modernize those banks and that money gets into our CDFIs and into our communities, so our businesses can access that capital, so that they can reopen, so that they can expand their businesses, so they can digitize, so they can become more enabled to serve what this new economy is going to deliver. That's I call it the critical heavy lift. The other part, the alternative, sure, look, there's a vast amount of capital that should be put into the alternative space for, folks like myself and others to manage. However, it is critically important that we drive it into the communities so that our people can borrow money at reasonable rates without usurious terms, so they can live their day-to-day lives and own houses and send their kids to school and actually fund their businesses using that form of capital. That's the vast majority of the capital that comes out of those pension systems.
Well, here's what I was on a Clubhouse chat last year, and they were having this whole conversation about how can we get more venture capital dollars flowing to African American owned enterprises. And I said, guys, y'all trying to have a conversation up here when the money is being driven down here. Right. I said, if we begin to educate the people where the money is down here and begin to say, you as a state, New Jersey, you cannot have folks who are managing the state pension fund and Black people are not represented. You can't hire investment firms to do this, and they're white led. They got no Black partners, but they didn't know that there are no Black companies in it. We've got to, as far as I'm concerned, mobilize the folks here to say, if the pressures here is put upon going upstream, then you can change it. You have some state controllers and others who are demanding those sort of different things. Who's on your board? Who are your investors? We got to be saying to them, are you using Black law firms? Are you using Black bond firms all throughout? Because what happens is when those contracts are being awarded, bottom line is this here. When you got Black law firms and Black accounting firms, if you got Black private equity, you're likely going to have more Black people who are hired in those particular firms. So when they are able to build and grow capacity, they can hire more of us, creating more opportunity.
It is an important thing that we are A, intentional, and B, understand how to drive it throughout the entire financial ecosystem. And I don't want people just to focus on venture capital or private equity, because that's a small piece of the ecosystem, an important one, but a smaller piece. We have to drive capital into the financial architecture that serves our Black businesses, modernizing that architecture. These are, banks and CDFIs and fintechs. We have to your point, establish more demand, equitable demand for Black business products and services, contracts so that they are actually driving dollars into our media channel, driving dollars into, purchasing contracts, service contracts, helping our businesses. Target just announced, $2 billion to spend over the next 5 years. That is a great start. African-American businesses can now, go through those systems and actually get their products purchased. We have to.
But actually, Rob, I want to hold you there. Because when I got that press release, I immediately fired an email back to Target and I said, okay, you're going to spend $2 billion with Black-owned companies by 2025. I said, what was your spend in 2019? What was your spend in 2020? What's your spend this year? What is the percentage of that? I said, I don't get excited by seeing the B word. I want to know what's the percentage. I said, so if you're going to do.
I get you. Here's the thing. It's important. I was on with Sister Bernice King about this. Look, there's a lot of people made a lot of pledges, and what we have to do is hold them accountable. I'm not saying it's enough. Right. I'm saying start. Okay, but we've got to get the ball moving and get it started. We have to strengthen the capacity of our Black businesses as well. They have to be able to deliver, those solutions and those products. Well, if they don't have expansion capital, I've been going back and forth with a bunch of African-American financial leaders over the last 5 days saying, all right, you guys tell me what the largest African-American companies are that have been financed. I'm not talking about a buyout or help, Reggie Lewis buy a company. I'm talking about financing growth. We just did one with the African-American business, $230 million. I said, man, that's the largest one I can recall in the last few years. I know Byron Allen's done some big financing, but we haven't had access to that sort of capacity to finance our businesses. And our small businesses can't get, a lot of them didn't tap into the PPP loans, et cetera, but can't get, $50,000, $100,000 loans to drive their businesses. In fact, Black owners of businesses are turned down twice as often as small business people. So that's what I think about. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that Target met all the end all. It's a good start, but we also have to finance the entire ecosystem. It doesn't matter if you can show up to Target and say, hey, guess what? I've got this new product, this body butter I want to sell to you. If you don't have the working capital to get $100,000, $250,000, or $1 million, $2 million of working capital, you can't keep it on the shelf anyway. You see what I mean? And they'll give you some So there's some creative things, and they'll give you a purchase contract. Great, here's my purchase contract. They're going to pay off in 90 days or 120 days. I'm not saying Target does it. I'm saying, but a lot of companies do it. And that starves our companies. Now, companies like Bank of America, John, you can go, pull this together with Ann Fanuca and other people at B of A, this Equality, Progress, Sustainability Bond, where they're actually saying, look, we will actually factor those, use this money to help factor those receivables so you don't actually doesn't chew up your working capital. So we're seeing people, African Americans and others who are actually understanding this point and this problem, but we've got to finance the entire architecture of the ecosystem. We can't just think about the venture capitalists and private equity. We've got to think about the entire ecosystem. That means strengthening the thousands, the tens of thousands of Black businesses through access to capital from banks that understand who they are and how they run their business. That, I think, is just one of the most fundamental things that we can do out of this time.
Well, that's why I think that when we begin to actually study our history, when we look, I've often said, arguably one of the greatest politicians in American history is Maynard Jackson, because what he did was use the power of the ballot to change the economics of the city of Atlanta. And one of the things that he did was he called those banks in and said, here I have Black businesses that have received city contracts, but to your point, they can't float their businesses for 90 to 180 days. You know that they're getting city contracts. So as a condition for us putting our city money in your banks, you will extend credit lines to those companies to be able to service these particular contracts. Banks balked, and he was like, fine, do understand, I'll pull the city money out of your banks and put it in banks that are actually going to do that. That's one of those tools. But again, the average person out there is not really understanding how all these pieces work. And what I'm constantly saying is we got to walk people through and explain it, because at the end of the day, others are getting rich off of taxpayer dollars, which is also our money.
So it is critically important, Roland. That's why I appreciate you so much. It's critically important that the media, the Black media, educate them as to why this is. Not everyone's going to understand it, but it's important for those of us who do to drive that financial architecture into the entire ecosystem as a point of intentionality. Okay, one of the things we're doing, we're focusing now on 6 southern communities: Atlanta, Birmingham, Charlotte, Houston, Memphis, and New Orleans, and saying, okay, we're doing with BCG and some others, PayPal and others, saying, okay, guess what? Let's look at this entire ecosystem. What do they need? First, we need broadband. Okay, let's bring in the broadband partners. We need to have, we need to strengthen the banks, the CDFIs, the MDIs. Okay, let's figure out who they are. Let's modernize them. Let's drive tier 1 capital into them. Okay, now how do we enable the small businesses to be effective? Let's get the PayPals, the Squares, and the Finasters and others to deliver solutions for those businesses that they can actually now be more efficient in the way they run. But it's an ecosystem that we have to intentionally drive forward. If we actually get to those 5 cities, and I call it the impact or halo around it, we'll get to 50% of the African American population. Just those 6 cities. I'm sorry, those 6 southern communities. Okay, so that's part of this. Let's use this point in time to rally the resources, not just capital, but know-how and wherewithal. Brother Maynard figured it out. He understood. Listen, okay, most businesses can't survive with 180-day payables. You just can't. Okay. So, or receivables. So what you've got to actually do is say, how do I factor that in a way that is advantageous? Let's use this liquidity in our market today, access to capital, the desire to help, these businesses to actually, to collapse that so they have more working capital so they can grow and scale their businesses. And oh, by the way, by implementing technology, software in particular, these businesses become more efficient in the way that they operate. Small businesses get a 900% ROI from implementing just basic software solutions and running their business, or scheduling, accounting, payroll, taxes, all that. Those are the sorts of solutions we need to actually jump on, which is the next generation of solutions in order to compete in this economy going forward.
I'm going to bring in John Rogers with Arrow Capital right now. Robert, you're still there. John, you've been very specific on this issue, not just saying, hey, we need Black board members, but you understand what happens when we're being left out of what Robert talked about, this entire economic infrastructure, even down to the point of the inclusion of Black-owned mutual funds in the 401k plans of companies all across the country. I mean, it is you can look at this and say, look, to understand the lack of black wealth in this country, it has been a deliberate attempt to exclude us from this so-called American dream.
You're accurate to describe it as great. It's an honor to be here with you and Robert and Reverend Sharpton and all the other guests that are here today. It's just been absolutely terrific. Really want to talk about a couple things that and follow up on Robert's point, because his points around access to capital and access to how important access to capital is, I agree completely. But I also think it's really important that we have access to customers. And I think sometimes we forget about that. When you read John Johnson's book, Succeeding Against the Odds, he talks about how hard he fought to get those early advertising firms to advertise with him. You know, Zenith Television. I can remember the book. He talked about how he got the CEO to advertise. He needed that, was so important. You know that, Roland, in your business. For you to grow, you want to have advertisers, and a lot of the times than you've been doing, or get sponsors. We need to be able to raise capital that way. So I want to make sure that bankers and others don't get off the hook by just giving us micro loans, but realize they also have to do business with us. I was talking to a person in marketing the other day, and I said, would you rather get a loan from JP Morgan Chase or the marketing contract for JP Morgan Chase, or one of the many marketing contracts that they have? So this access to customers, I think, is equally important to access to capital, and we need to keep pounding that point home. The other thing that you touched on that I think is critical is that, you know, what the University of Chicago has done, they've created this term business diversity to replace the term supplier diversity. And it's really worked extraordinarily well. Reverend Sharpton was kind to join us on a Zoom several months ago with the president of the University of Chicago and hundreds of minority entrepreneurs who want to do business with the University of Chicago. They've gone from basically 11 years ago to now over 95 minority-owned companies, primarily African-American companies, do business with the University of Chicago that didn't do it 11 years ago. And it's everything. Advertising agencies, advertising on Black radio, WVON, using 15 Black money managers and minority money managers for their endowment, architecture firms, accounting firms, consulting firms. It's just something that's beautiful to see, and all those companies have a chance to generate real, true wealth. So we need to just continue to make sure that we don't let these institutions off the hook.
Yep.
When I think about New Jersey, the last thing I'll say is New Jersey is doing some interesting things, but where I think they can do better is the universities in New Jersey, the hospitals in New Jersey. Even the Princeton Theological Seminary has $1 billion endowment. They are trying to think about ways to help Black people, but they spend zero of their dollars for their endowment with Black money managers at the Princeton Seminary, as far as we know. So we got to get all these institutions to do the right thing, not depend on government to do everything, because all these other anchor institutions in our local community are spending billions and billions of dollars, and no one's putting pressure on them to work with minority businesses, which finally brings me to my last point. We sit on all these nonprofit boards. We sit on these university and hospital and museum boards, and we're allowing all the economic opportunities to go to typically white men who often don't, of course, live in the community. And when you mentioned Leon Sullivan, I did an article recently with Stephanie Creary, a professor at the Wharton School, where I celebrated Leon Sullivan as a role model of how we need to show up in boardrooms, to follow in John Lewis's footsteps and make good trouble, point out that things are unfair and not just. So it's just not only getting more of us in the boardroom, but getting more of us in the boardroom who are willing to fight for economic justice.
John, I'm glad you made that point because when you talk about those contracts, because that really was the whole point when I responded to Target. I've been a part of this initiative with Byron Allen and other Black-owned media companies because, to your point, it's a perfect example. Launching this show, we're launching a new initiative come June. If an advertiser come to us and says, hey, let's do a $3 or $4 or $5 million advertising deal, can we handle that? Yes, we can. Getting that type of advertising deal keeps me from having to go get a $1 or $2 million loan. And so when I was challenging Target on that, I wanted to know the percentage, because here's my whole point. To announce you're going to do $2 billion, I went, okay, but what's the percentage? Is it $2 billion, 2%, 4%, 5%, 8%? Because that's the whole piece. Again, I don't just get excited when I see the B word for billion. My whole deal is that truly a fair share? And when we've been pressing folks on this, I talk about capacity. The reason you don't see a black-owned media company that's the size of a CNN or New York Times or whatever is because how we've been choked off from those advertising dollars. And then they come back, well, you don't have the metrics and all the different dancing we do. The challenge for us is to compensate. No. Are you awarding the dollars, even the people who can handle the capacity, or they're being frozen out? And that's why we got to keep pushing and pushing, not just even in private companies, but even when I talk about these state governments. New Jersey, the federal government, according to a study that was commissioned by Congressman Eleanor Holmes Norton, over a 5-year period, spent $5 billion on advertising alone. The federal government, black-owned media, got 51 million out of the 5 billion. New Jersey, New York, Illinois, Texas, all these companies, they spend money in all these areas. We still got to be saying, how much are we getting? And that's the constant pressure we got to apply to these entities, John.
But one of the things, Roland, you touched on earlier, which I think fits right into this message, it's really important, is that we want to keep track of the spending, but we also want to keep track of the spending by category.
Yes.
Because what's happened because of this term supplier diversity and the $1 billion roundtable, what even progressive companies can get away with is they'll spend money on a big distribution contract or big construction contract, big janitorial services contract. So then when you go and look at, again, the advertising opportunities, the law firms, the accounting firms, the private equity options, 401k options, all the different things that these companies spend money on, they can just check the box in a couple of areas and feel like they're done and leave us out of the parts of the economy where the wealth and jobs are created today, which are in professional services, in financial service, in media, in technology. And those are the places we're the most locked out of. So the term supplier diversity is literally 40 years out of date. It's like Blockbuster Video versus Netflix. We need to abolish that term, because I'd say it's a modern day Jim Crow if the black and brown people do the catering and the construction, which are important businesses, and the white guys get all the other opportunities in the hedge funds and private equity and technology to become billionaires and create philanthropy for their communities. So that's something I think is just so critically important. It's not the total spend, but keeping track of how each category is being spent.
Jennifer, I want to bring you in here because, and again, for folks, if you just started watching us, we're talking about Black economic social justice in New Jersey, walking our people through in terms of really how we are left out of this economic paradigm in the state, in the country. We're joined by our panelists, Robert Smith. We have, of course, John Rogers. Jennifer, I want to bring you in right now because again, when I talk to people about this on my show, people go, yo, I had no idea. And then they sort of think, man, that stuff is just way above me. But what I walk people through is to get them to understand that, look, you have to realize that when we don't get contracts, what John talks about, when we don't get the loans Robert's talking about, then we don't have the ability to hire staff, hire interns, create the partnerships with HBCUs to grow and build capacity. We talk about pre-COVID, we have 2.6 million Black-owned businesses in the United States. 2.5 million had one employee, doing an average revenue of $54,000. So when people talk about, man, these are Black-owned businesses, the reality is here. If we only have 100,000 Black-owned businesses in America with more than one employee, we've got a fundamental problem.
Well, it's a twofold problem, right? And I appreciate that we're centering on access to capital, being in the game. We have to do that work, but we have to appreciate that it's a two-pronged problem. So let me first say, with respect to access to capital, access to engaging in the game, one of the things that we don't often center on are the structural and institutional policies, laws that are on the books that allow government and the private sector to keep us from being engaged. An example for you would be that I presently am chairing the New York City Racial Justice Commission. And one of the things that we're looking at the charter of the city of New York. The charter is essentially the Constitution, the laws of the city of New York. Well, that charter says nothing about equity when it comes to participation in government contracts. So you can have, as we do in New York City, in the controller's office, you can have the controller's office, which manages the pensions, as oversight of pensions, essentially deciding who can compete for pension management. And we've seen cases where, they may put out a request for proposals that says that an entity has to have no less than $500 million in assets, a portfolio of assets, before it can even bid to participate in pension management. We need to look at these structural laws that keep some of our businesses from even beginning to the table to begin to compete, because many of our organizations can do the work, but they're not beginning with that much with respect to assets management.
But Jennifer, I want to throw this in right here because I covered City Hall in Fort Worth. I covered county government in Austin. I literally saw how that was created, how companies essentially wrote the RFPs that purposely eliminated folks. I saw it in construction. I'm gonna go back to Maynard Jackson. When Maynard Jackson was mayor, what he did was he broke up. He said, the rules say the only way you can beat on a prime contract is you've been a prime before. Well, hell, you always a sub, you can't be on the prime. So what he did was he broke the big contracts up into smaller prime contracts for black folks to bid. Under President Obama, they unbundled federal contracts, allowed to bid on the contracts. Trump comes in, bundled them back so you can only grab the large contracts. Biden and Harris is trying to unbundle them. These are the type of bureaucratic moves that the average person doesn't understand, and is purposely designed to freeze out a lot of different people where only a handful of companies can qualify for the contract.
You are right on point. And that's why we need to not only, we put our weight behind people that we bring into office, but then we need to have them attack these structural and institutional barriers. And the fact of the matter is that sometimes it can be done through charter revision, but it can also be done through legislation. We need to be pressing on that, because it is those systems. If you get it into the charter, if you get it into the law of the land, it becomes the way that things are done. But if you do it just on a policy by policy basis, or just this mayor or this city council speaker, then it shifts from one elected official to the next. We need to break down these structural and institutional barriers. The other point I want to make, though, is that we've got to do this on one hand, but we cannot forget that to a certain extent, we are talking about just a limited pool of people who can compete. Because when we look at the fact that our community has, depressed wages, so depressed and suppressed wages, they can't even begin to think about raising the capital, getting in the game to even to participate in some of these wealth building opportunities. The fact that, 50 to 60% of our households, our community households, have women as the primary breadwinners, and their wages are suppressed. That means that our children are growing up in poverty. They don't have enough money to even make ends meet. So it has to be this two-pronged process. We need to be pressing on these opportunities to engage in the game and build business and build wealth. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we're not leaving our brothers and sisters behind who can't even pay for basic needs.
Robert, I want to bring you back in. His was interesting, and I got no problem saying it. When the census came around, the Congressional Black Caucus fought to have additional dollars put into the budget to ensure the outreach to African Americans. Young and Rubicam, they got the contract to handle the media for the census. Well, we, went through the whole procedure. They had a portal that you had to go fill out, and we went through the whole deal. Never heard from them. So several months go by, and then I asked my ad folks, I'm like, hey, what's the deal? Have you heard from them? Because I knew for a fact that the CBC had an additional $70 million put into the budget to ensure that black media was able to be reached. All of a sudden, I have Congressman Stephen Horseman on my show. He was over the Census Task Force for the Congressional Black Caucus. Young and Rubicam told him point blank, they were not going to buy any newspaper ads for any paper with circulation 50,000 or less. That is 98% of all black newspapers in America. I then bust their ass for 5 days on my show. And all of a sudden, they picked the phone up. They called Carol H. Williams' agency. Oh my God, what's going on? She's like, because 5 months have gone by, y'all haven't even responded to his proposal. They said, what should we do? She said, I advise y'all to cut a check because he's not going to stop. The only reason I got a $250,000 deal is because I had to blast them publicly. And so I told the CBC, audit them. I want to know specifically how much money went to Black-owned media. And so what happens is these white ad agencies, this is perfect, this is an example, the white ad agencies freeze us out with these games, create these metrics that they only come up with, and then we wonder why we can't grow. And so your point about access to loans, but what John is talking about, when the contracting game is set up to purposely exclude us, that is also what we have to fight.
Yeah, and Roland, that fits so many I'll call it, occurrences that we find in the financial services industry. I remember and recall years back, 5-6 years ago, where there was a pension fund contract for the federal government. Remember, the federal government has about $1 trillion in pension, and in order to qualify, you had to have over $50 billion in assets under management. Well, at that point in time, there wasn't an African American, asset manager that had $50 billion in assets under management, right? So here you have a pension plan program that has been contributed to by our people for generations now, and we don't even qualify because the quote unquote the floor qualification is well above any of our participating entities. It's not surprising, but what's important is we have, in your case, Black media that can actually come out and stand and say, this should not stand, this cannot stand, and you can't let it go. In our industry, one of the challenges, of course, is if you take that on as an individual, manager of funds, the repercussions can frankly be, catastrophic for the management of your firm. And so how do you do that? You have to work in a consortium and trade organizations and with the Black media to help them understand and mobilize. Reverend Sharpton talked to it. It's like, well, who are the people actually contributing to these pension plans? Well, a lot of those folks are our folks. And so our people need to understand that, this is how they can exercise their power to ensure that other members of our community can participate in the management of that capital so that we can actually drive some of the fruits of those benefits, not only to just them as, us being, hopefully superior managers as we typically have been based on the data and what we've been able to do, but also, how we drive some of those activities to continue to bolster other elements of our economy and our community. It's not unusual, but it's something that has to be called out. But if you don't have an independent Black media, you can't call it out.
But this is the thing here, John, and I'm gonna bring in Pastor Jefferson in just 1 second, John. That is sort of the catch-22. I was on a call, and there was a brother who was like, he said, "Man, we were talking about even political dollars." Because look, I had to deal with this with the Biden presidential campaign. I had to deal with this with other political campaigns. And the brother was like, well, if we say something, we might not get the contract next time. I said, well, you ain't getting the contract today. So ain't no guarantee you're gonna get it tomorrow. The reality is we have to have entities, organizations that are shining light on this. Otherwise, to Robert's point, I get it. Jacobs, his firm, has filed a lawsuit against New Jersey. That's the last resort for a lot of different people. But if we do not shed light on this, if we do not make this public, if we do not call for Black legislators in New Jersey to have actual hearings talking about this, getting the actual numbers, people are going to dance around it. There are people who are mad at Byron Allen. We dealt with General Motors, mad with a full-page ad he took out. But the bottom line is this here. Look, show me in the history of America where Black folks have gotten anything on GP and we didn't have to call folk out to get it.
Right.
John?
All right. Yeah, from working with us all these years, that's why we have to support Reverend Sharpton and his movement. We have to support Reverend Jackson and his Wall Street project and all the things that he's done. We got to show up. We got to write the checks. It really, truly matters. We have to support our progressive leaders, Joyce Beatty and Maxine Waters and others who are in there fighting for us every day. And if we sit and don't, then we don't have the power to put the pressure on these organizations to include us in a fair way. In New Jersey, you have John Harmon in the New Jersey Chamber of Commerce has done an extraordinary job of fighting for Black businesses in New Jersey. But there's too few and far between the John Harmons who really get it and are out there working hard for all of us. But then we have to support those organizations. Again, show up, write the checks, and then we can all rise together.
Pastor Jefferson, explain to
Roland, I just want to say to you, you mentioned, you talked about Operation Breadbasket at the beginning, as did Reverend Sharpton, and he mentioned my dad, who ran the New York chapter. In a book that my father wrote titled God in the Ghetto, he talks about the 4 elements of Operation Breadbasket that today we don't put into practice. We talk about boycotting, and it's for just a time-limited period, and we don't really know what we're doing. The elements of Operation Breadbasket were education, and then they were education, investigation. Beginning with investigation, as you said, look at what the company's doing. Then educate the community about how the company is disadvantaging us. Then engage in negotiation. And then if that failed, you move to demonstration, you move to boycott. We often talk about jumping right to boycott, and then we lose people because they don't understand what this is all about. We need to try to figure out how we resurrect some of that.
All right, and actually pulling this up, Pastor Jefferson, as Deb lays out, is called the 6-step: information gathering 1, committee evaluation 2, negotiation education 3, economic withdrawal 4, agreement covenant 5, monitoring 6. Pastor Jefferson, explain to folks what this coalition is that you and others have put together to drive this issue in New Jersey. So explain to them exactly what it is, the name and what it is.
Well, first of all, it is the New Jersey Economic Justice Coalition. And Roland, let me just say this, and that is, it is absolutely essential that we support Reverend Sharpton, and of course that we support Robert and John and the others that we've talked about. But here's something that is also essential. What is essential is that we have in place, I would say at the grassroots level, what we're doing here in the state of New Jersey, and that is heightening the awareness of the real tragedy of economic injustice in the state of New Jersey. We just can't talk about it at a national level. We got to talk about it at the point of the pain for which people are absolutely experiencing a lot of the, I would say, economic setbacks that they need in order to keep food on the table. This is the reason why here in the state of New Jersey, we've been after this now for 10 to 15 years, economic injustice. And what we have to do, and Jennifer hit it, Robert hit it, John has hit it, we have to make sure that we're educated at the grassroots level. I call it the power of the pew. The largest segment of customers, the largest segment of people that we're talking about are individuals that are in the pews of these churches. It's no accident that Dr. Bill Jones was one that was out in front, that we got Dr. Leon Sullivan that was out in front, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. out in front, Reverend Al Sharpton that is there. Because the largest segment of voters that put people in place that support or not support what we're about, those people are in our churches. And so while I have a business background, a huge business background, being with AT&T and one of the top companies, Comcast, at the end of the day, what I have found is that individuals are not aware, do not understand the subject. And this is the reason why, Roland, this town hall is so important. What we have to do is inform and educate, and then we got to engage our people so that they will understand the source of the pain for which a lot of this is causing. In today's environment, the voters in the state of New Jersey have literally given this administration a pass. God bless Jacob, because Jacob had the courage not to sit back and see an injustice that was done, and then at the end of the day, not do anything about it. One of the things we must do, we must hold individuals accountable that we put in office. These Black voters in our churches, need to understand how grandma, and Al hit this on the head. They need to understand how and why we're gentrifying our community, and the fact that grandma's pension is going to run grandma's own grandkids out of their own community. And so we have to turn the heat up, and we have to therefore kind of, bring on the pressure. That's what the economic justice, that's what the whole, I would say, this coalition is about. It is to inform people, educate people, and then make sure that people understand. And Jennifer hit this. One of the things we got to do is not just protest, but we got to create policies. We have economic barriers in the state of New Jersey that is absolutely crazy. There's no reason why we should have that in place other than the fact that we have allowed that to occur in the state of New Jersey. And so we got to take this stuff that we're talking about at the top end, we got to bring it down to the pew, and we got to make sure we teach our people and educate our people how to vote. And then we got to put legislation on the table to ensure the fact that we don't have to keep coming back to this same thing. I would say this, while we need access to capital, we cannot just keep talking about this topic. We need to have an urgency of now, y'all. We absolutely need to crack this code now. And we have the wherewithal to crack it now. And it should not take us the next 5 to 10 years in order to crack it. I believe that if we educate, I believe that if we engage, I believe that if we get people out to the polls to vote, at the end of the day, we don't have to have individuals begging for money because it's their money already. The largest segment of consumers today is the African-American consumers. So why, for God's sake, can't we just not get Black people aligned around that, hold people accountable that we put in office, and make sure that we get legislation so that we can reform our economy?
I'm going to say something right now that, again, some might deem to be controversial. That's fine. I really don't care. And it's this, and Robert, John, or Jennifer, or Pastor, you can jump in. And let me be clear. I've always said that when we start talking about economics, one of the things that we have done is we've gotten this thing reversed. And that is, I believe that the people who understand the sector, who understand the area, should be driving the economic conversation. This is no disrespect to any of our civil rights groups. I believe what they serve as a lever of influence. But what has to happen is we've got to have the individuals with the knowledge of how these systems work, educating Congressional Black Caucus members, educating on the congressional federal level, as well as in the individual state levels. I've spent time with city council members and state representatives saying, you are a legislator, but let me explain to you how this system is actually working. You thought, hey, I got the money approved, everything is good. It's like, nah, that's not really what's happening. And so the Black folks who are in the economic space must be driving the economic conversation, but then leveraging the influence of civil rights groups, as you said, Robert, these trade associations as well. But those who are dealing with it have got to be driving this. Want to get your thoughts on that? I'm going to jump right in. I think we've got to reverse a bit.
I'm going to jump right in first, and I may be a little bit more controversial than you, because what I'm going to submit, what I'm going to posit to you is that there aren't as many free and independent thinkers in the business community as a Robert Smith, as a John Rogers. And so just as you talked about the Black media saying, well, if I speak up, I may not get that next contract. We have many people in business who say, if I speak up, then I may be out of the game. And so we can't just simply rely on those persons. We do need them, but they are hesitant to get engaged because they're still trying to figure out if they are secure in their positions at the table.
Yeah, I'm speaking of expertise. What I'm speaking of, like I say, I've had conversations, Robert, with individual Black Caucus members saying, okay, let me walk you through this. You did this on the political side, but let me explain to you what's happening on the practical side. And this is what needs to be fixed. And you may not even realize this. I've done this with actual Black board members of companies who they're at this level, but they're not understanding what's really happening down here. And so that exchange information has to be there so folks are knowledgeable about what's really happening. So when we go in, and let me just go ahead and say it,
companies don't decide to cut a deal with our civil rights groups to say, hey, here's $1 million, when frankly, we're leaving 10 billion on the table.
Yeah, if I can, Roland, I'll use these as my parting comments, if that's okay.
Sure.
The important part of this discussion around this topic in particular is we have to continue to strengthen our ecosystem. You know, our ecosystem, it relies on our media, it relies on our trade organization, it relies on our businesses, it relies on our financial institutions that are part of our community. And, you know, part of what we have to do is we do have to educate, and we have to inform, and we also have to take, you know, informed positions and help people understand why that's the right position. And then we can bring the civil rights organizations in if those positions aren't being taken and we're being, you know, disenfranchised, or there's some disparity in the way that's occurring. You know, we see this in every industry. If it's banking, if it's, you know, if it's finance, if it's in media, if it's in, you know, that you know, too often people are making a decision who don't really understand the impact and effect it has on those who are in that industry. So, you know, it is your show. Other shows are critically important to I call it unpack and decouple. But then we also have to get to our legislators in the Congressional Black Caucus and, you know, and Reverend Sharpton and others to help them understand. And we spend a lot of time in our community, financial services community, with a number of folks. Like, I'm going to spend some time now with the presidents of the HBCUs to help them understand how to think about leveraging the federal dollars that they've just recently received, the donations, in addition to how they should think about their endowments and leveraging their endowments to move forward into the next generation of technology delivery for their institutions. But we have the expertise in our community. Finally, you know, two generations ago we didn't. A generation ago we started to have it, but we have it now. We have to work together more in a cohesive ecosystem, and I'm encouraged by that. And one of the things that social media and these sorts of shows have done is actually it's brought us together much more instantaneously and rapidly, so we can actually address issues, talk about them, and then formulate solutions and act upon them.
So Robert,
one second. Robert's about to leave. Of course, Robert Smith. He is the founder and chairman and CEO of Vista Equity Partners. We certainly appreciate your participation in our panel. Thank you so very much, my alpha brother. And we'll chat soon.
I just wanted to also, hey, Robert, David Jefferson. I just wanted to personally thank Robert as well. It's people like Robert that can truly help us move this ball, and he has helped move this ball before. To take the time, Roland, for him to be with us is an absolute honor. And Robert, appreciate your dedication to this topic. And I am confident that it will continue to empower the folks here in New Jersey so that we can bring about economic reform in the state. So thanks a lot. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All the best.
John, thank you very much. John Rogers, on that particular point, you know, this whole idea of why we must have the intestinal fortitude to speak up. The reality is this, and I understand the people who are afraid. I get that there are individuals, even in my business, who say, you know, we're getting 3,000. I'm afraid I need that 3,000, so I can't really say anything. But even though I should be getting 20,000, and what I've said to folks is, if we continue on that path, they are going to continue to give us 20 cents on the dollar. Let me give you an example. I have the book around here somewhere. Brett Pulley has a book called The $1 Billion Bet, the unauthorized biography of Bob Johnson and BET. And in the book, he writes that BET was getting $1,500 for a 30-second ad. MTV, comparable number of homes they're in, we're getting $8,000 for a 30-second ad. Sumner Redstone and Mel Karmazin, when they bought BET, immediately said, oh, hell, we know how we're buying this company for $3.3 billion. We know using our power, we can now start getting the same amount of money. So when we think about BET being sold for $3.3 billion, had BET been getting its fair share for Black consumers, that company should have been sold, if they chose to do so, for $10 billion or more. In fact, if you look at being sold for $3 billion, had they been getting their fair share, Bob and Sheila Johnson could have sold a third of the company and fetched that same $3.3 billion and still been able to own it. So the point I'm making there is we have to at some point say to the system, no longer are you going to start keep giving us 20, 25% on the dollar.
Right. Well, again, it comes back to us. You know, I tell people all the time that we wouldn't have lost the Ebony Jet building here in Chicago if we had people working in major consumer products companies insisting that the advertising go to a Black company like Ebony or Jet or Black Enterprise or WBON Radio, what have you. But we sit there and allow this to happen. And so, you know, I know you know this, 17 years ago, we started a conference called the Black Corporate Directors Conference with Charles Tribbett from Russell Reynolds. And the whole concept was started because I noticed that there were very few Leon Sullivans in the boardrooms of corporate America, people willing to speak out and make change. So conference has grown from 30 directors to last year before COVID, we had 300 directors come together. And we've had everyone come and speak, you know, from Barack Obama to Jamie Dimon to Ursula Burns to Don Thompson. We've had Magic Johnson, which has been an extraordinary success story, the kind of speakers we get. Usually 7 CEOs of giant companies. Robert's been there. David Rubenstein's been there. It's just been a wonderful thing. But what we do every Friday night, we have what we call the conscience of the conference. Someone to remind us the responsibilities that we have to fight for economic justice once we're in the boardroom. So over the years, we've had Harry Belafonte, we've had Andy Young, we've had Congressman Clyburn, we've had Reverend Sharpton, we've had Reverend Jackson, Sherilyn Eiffel, Valerie Jarrett, people who are committed to our community. They're going to be willing to show us how to fight for economic justice when in the boardroom. And that's always been the highlight of that conference. Again, having those folks who actually marched with Dr. King or believed in Dr. King's movement. And because too many of us directors get in that boardroom, we're just happy to be there, to collect the checks, not make anyone uncomfortable, hope that nothing changes. But if we don't speak out, we're actually giving cover for the status quo to stay the same. Because the white CEO sits there and says, well, I've got a Black director, they're not saying anything, things must be okay. It gives them an excuse to not fight for change. So again, I keep coming back to this, it's up to us to fight in that spirit of John Lewis. And again, make good trouble. Point out what
Jennifer,
unfair and unjust.
Jennifer, I want to give you an example. I want to give an example of, again, I want to show you disparity. John mentioned Ebony Magazine, losing the building. And frankly, Ebony has been on a downward spiral. Yes, it was just acquired in bankruptcy by Junior Bridgman. But for people who have no idea, who don't understand what happens internally, Ebony Magazine had a higher circulation than Esquire magazine. Ebony was getting $20,000 for a full page ad. Esquire was getting $200,000 for the same full page ad. So if people want to understand why you really don't have an Ebony magazine anymore, why they had to sell the building, why the company got broken up, why Johnson Publishing Company, frankly, had to file for bankruptcy, it is because they were suffocated from the very dollars that sustain media companies. Now, if you take that with Ebony and then you apply that to all of these other industries, you will see the exact same thing. And so what Pastor Jefferson is, what they're trying to do in New Jersey, what I've been talking about, what John is talking about, what you've been working for, is we've got to get our people to understand we cannot be quiet. We've got to be loud and very loud to Governor Phil Murphy,
that's right,
to the state legislature in New Jersey, to say, here are the numbers. The numbers are grossly inefficient. They must be jacked up now because, again, you want our votes. We want the dollars.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And I just want to take it a step further and tell you that it applies the scenario that you just spoke to with respect to Ebony. Also, you know, is ever present in contracting with the government around just basic human services and social services. We have many minority-led organizations that are out in our communities seeking to provide everything from childcare all the way through elderly supports. And the rates that they are paid are less than the rates paid to white-led organizations that may have millions more in assets, both in operating expenses and in endowment, but we don't have the bargaining power, we don't have the negotiating power. And then what happens? They close. Same thing in philanthropy. A report that was issued about 4 years ago showed that community foundations across this nation invest just 3% in Black-led nonprofits. And then of that 3%, only I'm flipping it. They invest 1.6% in Black-led nonprofits. And of that 1.6%, only 3% goes to organizations like National Action Network, the NAACP, my organization, FPWA, organizations that are doing the work to bring about structural and institutional change. It's all, this system is corrupt. And until we do the work of organizing, and those of us who can lead and raise these issues and put them out there and bring people along to push with us, it's going to play out in nonprofits and in business.
Pastor Jefferson, I need to know, how is the information being compiled? So, for instance, we know with the lawsuit that Jacob Walthour has filed on a private equity deal, but have y'all received from the Black Caucus or anyone else to what John talked about in the sectors in terms of how much is being spent with Black-owned media advertising? How much is being spent with Black-owned companies in construction, and how much is being spent in all these areas of the state government in New Jersey? Do y'all have any of that information yet?
Roland, listen, we have some of that information. We are compiling more of that information. Jennifer hit the nail on the head in terms of several steps that Dr. Jones laid out. One was investigating. The very purpose and the reason we're putting this in place, Roland, is so that we can populate the data, the analysis, the information, so that we can direct people to the facts and direct people to the data. Here's the deal. The deal is, I can't tell you the number of people who have said, you guys are on the money, push that, we're with you, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, Jennifer, you're correct. The system is corrupt. Individuals who would be for the necessity and the urgency of economic justice are a part of the same system that benefit them economically, although it represent crumbs. As a people, we got to stop dealing with a slice of the pie and start understanding that there's a whole pie, that we need to be about pursuing the whole pie as opposed to us fighting and trying to deal with the crumbs. When you have individuals that you put in place, you've elected those persons have to represent our community. Those persons have to stand for, as Jennifer was pointed out, we have people who are definitely concerned that if they speak out, something is going to happen to them. Well, why won't we stand with those people and say to those individuals that if you attack them, you're attacking us? And if that is the case, then I think that we'll be in a better position to help deal with this. We have people like John Rogers that is on. We have people like Jennifer that was on, Robert Smith that was on. It means a lot to the folks in the state of New Jersey for those individuals to be a part of this town hall, bringing this to the grassroots, as you said a few minutes ago, that Joe often say, put it where the goats can get it. This town hall is about putting it where the goats can get it. Individuals thought that this entire effort was about the case that Jacob has brought. Does that represent systemic racism in the state of New Jersey? Absolutely. But Jacob is more than about a case, he's about a cause. We're standing for a cause around economic justice and bringing you into play and having you to host, bringing Jennifer in, bringing Robert in, bringing John in, bringing other persons in. The whole intent here is to create the pressure. And Roland, we just cannot be vocal. We got to turn up the volume. We have to make sure that our people are aligned around information and education so that we can press the issue. And that's what the New Jersey Economic Coalition is all about. It's all about shining a light, making sure people understand the data, getting the information out, and then getting people to support the kind of legislation that we need in this state that I'm hoping will set a model for the rest of the country in order for us to grow the GDP, in order for us to create the jobs, in order for us to increase the minimum wage, and in order for us to make sure we go to the point of pain, that we have that Joe Blow, that we have the Aunt Sally's before people so that they can really see, hey, folks, this is what this is all about. We have people that are hurting, and we need to bring relief to those people now, Roland. That's the bottom line.
Hey, John, I raised that point, and we got about 10 minutes left. I raised that point about the data, and that's important, because what happens is, again, companies are real good, and the governments are real good at trying to use percentages and dollars to suit their particular purpose. And just share with folks your advice on how Pastor Jefferson's group should be approaching this in dealing with the state legislators, state officials, the governor, in terms of getting the data right and then making those demands to ensure that we're getting our fair share.
Well, thank you. I think it's really, really important to keep track by category. At our Black Directors Conference, we ask everybody to keep track of three things. We call them the 3 Ps. One is philanthropic dollars going into our community. 2 is, of course, getting people in the C-suite and leadership roles of the company. And the 3rd is keeping track of the purchasing and keeping track of it, again, by category. Because otherwise, what happens, and I've seen this time and time again, we got ourselves brainwashed a generation ago that we only care about construction. And that's important. But the economy has moved on. You know, our wealthiest person in Illinois, Ken Griffin, made his $10 billion or more, now $15 billion in hedge funds. You know, we know that John Paulson in hedge funds once made $5 billion in 1 year. We know that Henry Kravitz at KKR controls 1 million jobs through his private equity firm. It's worth several $billion. So as I said earlier, it's just morally wrong that we get the only opportunities in the construction with the lowest profit margins, and the white men get these opportunities where they have the huge profit margins to get extraordinarily wealthy. And I think that's just so important that we understand that. So Exelon Corporation in Chicago, where I was on the board for 18 years under leadership of a guy named Bill Von Haney, they keep track of all the spend by category. As a director, I would get a book this thick, and I could then go through the book every year with Emmett Vaughn, who was the head of the program, and talk to him about, hey, we're doing this amount with security guards in various plants we have, but when it comes to advertising, we're spending this amount of money with Black and brown advertising agencies, even though we own utilities in Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, D.C. I wouldn't have been able to expose that if I wasn't getting a document that showed how everything was being done by category. So I just can't overemphasize how important that is. You know, you get what you measure, but you got to measure it right.
Certainly, I got to give a shout out to my late alpha brother, Emmett Vaughn. He was a really, really good brother. And you're right, he was really serious about this. And so God rest his soul. Jennifer, the data is important. And the reason I think groups have to have that, because when we're going to the people, we got to be able to say, folks, state of New Jersey is spending $500 million in this area. Black owned is getting 3 million. They're spending 100 million over here. Black owned companies are getting 1 million. People need to see and hear the contrast to understand how we are getting screwed, and then be able to say, and here are the Black companies that are available. I do that when we talk about the Black ad agencies. I've had some Black groups say, well, you know, I don't, our Black ad agencies don't have the capacity. I'm like, yes, they do. Here's the owner. Here's their cell phone. Here's their email. Call them.
I agree with you, and I'm just going to circle back to the fact that we need to use the data to then inform structural and institutional change. When we think about, you know, at the end of the day, who is holding the levers? You know, if agencies, companies want to do business in New Jersey, they want to do them in New York or wherever around these United States, it is the government that ultimately decides, whether it be through taxation, whether it be through other mechanisms, who can and cannot do business in the state. And so just as we are increasingly talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we're looking at social impact and social responsibility, you know, when we talk about who sits on boards and what have you, We need to look at these charters, these local, laws. We need to look at state law, state constitution, and we need to press that included in these, in these bodies of law are statements about equity. That contracts that have to be awarded by the state, or if you want to do business in the state of New Jersey, then you have to abide by certain representation and equity when it comes to contracts, when it comes to equity in the amount of the contracts and what you're going to pay, et cetera, et cetera. We need to do more of that, because if we don't do the structural work, we're just going to keep on doing this year after year after year.
And Pastor, we got to remind people, this is our money. When it comes to cities, counties, state, and federal, that's taxpayer money.
I think that so often when we're talking these kinds of topics, for whatever reason, individuals believe they're talking about somebody else's money. That's our issue, because we have not educated our people. The consumer rules the day if the consumer is educated. We need to educate our people with respect to money, the flow of money, how you make money, how you save money. And we need to do that in a lot of different forums. One of the forums for which we need to do that is right in our churches. We have more institution of churches. We need to use social media, but we also need to ensure the fact that we tap into the major organization that is touching most of the people. In New Jersey, we're going through right now, examining every piece of legislation, examining every, quote, state and local kind of a contract policy that is in place, in order to unpack that, in order to unravel that. And then we're going to put it up on our website so that people will absolutely know what's what. I'm confident and I believe that when we educate people around what the issues are, when we break this thing open, stop talking about it in general terms, but really getting down to the nitty-gritty of the facts and the data, I'm confident that we'll be able to create the kind of following where individuals will chime in and we can get something done.
I'm sorry.
Final comments, John Rogers, go ahead.
I was just going to add to that. One of the things, Reverend Sharpton was great to talk about. Even our friends in the labor unions, sometimes the labor unions are not using minority-owned firms. The churches are the same way.
Yes.
The United Methodist Church, the Presbyterian Church have huge multi-billion-dollar pension funds.
That's right, John.
Very little of those assets with minority folks. And I think that's something that's important to note. And then finally, when you talk about our money, lots of money coming from the federal government now is going to universities, hospitals, and museums and bailing them out because of what's happened with COVID, right? As that money flows to those institutions, there should be a responsibility those institutions have, again, to work with Black-owned companies. But no one has been really holding them accountable around that. I know that some leaders like Hakeem Jeffries and Greg Meeks, terrific congressional leaders like that, are starting to ask those questions. Congressman Cleaver, Congressman Kennedy. We need to put the pressure on, because right now they're receiving all these dollars from us and still not including us.
I want to jump in here and say, I so much appreciate this panel, and I appreciate all that everyone is doing, and I'm excited to learn more about what Dr. David Jefferson is leading. We've got a center on access to income building opportunities, but we also still, I can't leave without saying this, we have to focus on the fact that we have so many Black women who are the primary breadwinners in their homes, and they do not have enough money to make ends meet, because the majority female jobs in this nation are depressed when it comes to wages, and that is intentional. That is by design, and as a result, our children are growing up disproportionately in poverty. And so as we do this work, we have to remember that Black women want to earn money. Even educated Black women are making less than high school educated only white men. They want to make money, and they want to be engaged in wealth building and in investment and owning their own businesses. But if we do not speak up for them, we're not going to get anywhere.
Folks, final comments before I let Pastor Jefferson close out. This is real simple, y'all. Show me the money. If you want to talk about America, just understand America's capitalistic society. You visit the White House, Treasury Department is the only department that shares along with the White House. Power and money, money and power, they go together. And we have been frozen out of this. Reverend Sharpton talked about, he opened talking about Dr. King's book, Chaos of Community. Where do we go from here? That's what this book is. Dr. King laid out an economic vision. You listen to the April 3rd, 1968 speech at Mason Temple, the night before he was assassinated. He talked about an economic plan. He talked about redistribute the pain. He talked about economic withdrawal. He talked about doing business with black companies, putting money in black banks. And so it's all there. But here's the piece. We cannot be scared to make demands. Look, I understand, folks. Those of you who are business owners, I understand you want to stay in business. But guess the most guaranteed way you're not going to stay in business? If you don't get contracts, if you don't get loans, if you don't get capital. And so you have to say something. You must be willing to speak up, and you must be willing to put some stuff on the line. We only sit here because the previous generation put some stuff on the line to make it easier for us. We've got to make it easier for the next generation. I've made it perfectly clear. I got no problem calling out any company, any government, any nonprofit who are not spending money with black folks, who are not spending money on black-owned media, because at the end of the day, if we don't say something, who will? This is all on us. We got to fight for ourselves. And like Frank Lucas said, Denzel played an American gangster. I'm going to get that money.
Hey,
Pastor
Roland.
Patterson, go ahead. Pastor Jefferson, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Roland, first of all, let me really thank you, man, for for the commitment that you made to your people and the commitment that you've made to our community. We really want to thank you for that. On behalf of all of the audience today and those who's going to watch this later on, I also want to take the opportunity to truly thank, Robert, who had to jump off. I want to thank John, and I want to thank Jennifer. I certainly want to commend Jacob for the courage that he has had in order to stand tall as a pioneer so that others can really benefit from what has happened from him to him. I think that people should not get so focused on the case that they don't appreciate the cause for which we're engaged in here in the state of New Jersey. Folks, this is a defining moment. This is a pivotal moment in the history of our nation. If we don't seize this opportunity, I think that we will betray the spirit of our ancestors. We will betray the spirit of Dr. Bill Jones, betray the spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., betray the spirit of Dr. Leon Sullivan, and so many others whose names that I can call. We have a sense of urgency for now, and we must step up now. And so I'm asking for not only your prayers, but I'm asking for your action, that we would engage in this movement and ensure the fact that we do not let this window close, that we can really make something happen. And I want to just give this to the folks that are listening. We do have a website, the New Jersey Black Economic Justice Coalition, njbej.org. I want to repeat, njbej.org, where you will find data. You can provide, any input that you want. We will continue to populate our website with information that will engage the people in the state of New Jersey so that we can really bring about enormous change. And so once again, thanks folks for joining us today. Stay tuned for the next time that we will be on. But it was an absolute pleasure and honor to have our guest for the town hall today. God bless you all.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Excited about what you're doing.
Take care, Jennifer. We'll be in touch. I'll see you next.
Absolutely.
See you next
Thank you.
right.